The serial killer who planned every murder. The chilling case of Israel Keys. The night was quiet in Anchorage, Alaska. Snow covered the streets like a white blanket, and everything seemed peaceful, until the door of a small coffee stand slammed shut. Inside, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was terrified. A man in a ski mask had jumped over the counter, holding a gun. "Don't make a sound," he said calmly. His voice was low, steady, almost too calm for someone committing a crime. He didn't yell or rush. Every movement was planned, every step rehearsed. Samantha did what he said, thinking maybe she could survive if she stayed calm. But this wasn't just a robbery. It was the start of something much darker. Hours later, that same man sat in his white pickup truck with Samantha tied up in the back. He didn't panic. He didn't shake. He hummed quietly as he drove into the freezing Alaskan night. Before dawn, she was gone, and he was back home, tucking his daughter into bed as if nothing had happened. The man's name was Israel Keys, and this wasn't his first time. He had spent years planning every single murder he committed, burying weapons, ropes, and even cash across the country, waiting for the perfect time to use them. But this time, something unexpected was about to happen, something that would finally reveal who he really was. When police checked the coffee stand the next morning, Samantha was missing. Her wallet was gone, the cash register was open, and her car keys were still on the counter. A security camera caught a blurry image of a tall man leading her away. But no one recognized him. Not yet. What the town of Anchorage didn't know was that this man had done this before, in places far from Alaska. He was a traveler, a builder, a father, and a monster all at once. 2 days later, Samantha's father received a text message from her phone. It said, "I'm fine. Just need to get away for a bit." At first, it seemed like maybe she'd left on her own. But her family knew Samantha. She would never disappear without saying goodbye. The message wasn't from her. It was from the man who had taken her. Keys had already planned every step of what he would do next. He had built a shed behind his house, a quiet, hidden space no one ever questioned. That's where he kept her. Days later, he returned home from a family trip, calm as always, and walked straight to the shed. He had already thought of what to do next, how to make people believe she was still alive, how to get money without being caught. Every detail was part of his plan. The police began to investigate, but Keys left no clues behind. He didn't use his real car, and his phone was off during the abduction. He had been careful. The only lead they had was the photo he later sent to Samantha's family, a picture of her sitting upright, eyes open, as if she were alive. He demanded ransom money. But what no one knew was that Samantha had already been dead when the photo was taken. He had used fishing line to lift her eyelids and braided her hair to make her look alive. It was cruel. It was calculated. And it worked. The family, desperate to believe she was still alive, did everything the text said. They deposited the ransom money into her account, hoping she'd come home. That was exactly what Keys wanted. He had planned it perfectly down to how he would get the cash without ever being seen. Weeks later, in a small town in Texas, a man withdrew money from Samantha's bank card at an ATM. The surveillance camera caught him, a man in a mask, driving a white Ford Focus. The FBI finally had a lead. They tracked the withdrawals as he moved from one state to another: New Mexico, Arizona, then into Texas. He thought he was invisible. But this time, the pattern he created would lead them straight to him. Back in Alaska, police pieced the clues together: flight records, car rentals, and the ATM footage. Whoever this man was, he was smart. He never used his own credit cards. He traveled long distances just to commit his crimes. He buried kill kits, buckets filled with weapons, duct tape, and tools, in random states, years before using them. This wasn't someone acting on impulse. This was someone who treated murder like a project. The FBI called every field office in the country to look for similar patterns. That's when they realized this man could be connected to other unsolved murders, couples who had gone missing, people who vanished without a trace, crimes that didn't fit any profile. He didn't pick victims based on type, age, or gender. He He picked them based on opportunity. On March 13, 2012, in a small Texas parking lot, a highway patrol officer spotted a white Ford Focus matching the description from the ATM footage. The driver was calm, polite, and cooperative. His name was Israel Keys. When they searched his car, they found Samantha's debit card, her cell phone, and a gun. That was all the proof they needed, but they had no idea just how much more they were about to uncover. At the police station, Keys sat quietly in the interrogation room, sipping a glass of water. He smiled slightly when the agents asked about Samantha. "You've been busy," one of them said, sliding the evidence across the table. Keys looked at it, then back at them. "You have no idea," he said softly, and then he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, and whispered something that made every agent in the room go silent. "I'm not like other killers," he said. "I planned everything." The room froze. One of the agents asked, "How many?" Keys looked down, then up again, his eyes cold and empty. "You'll find out soon enough." The air felt heavy. This wasn't just about Samantha anymore. The FBI had caught a man who had been hunting people across the country for over a decade, and he was about to tell them things no one was prepared to hear. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Israel Keys sat calmly, his wrists cuffed to the table. Across from him, two FBI agents watched closely, waiting for him to speak again. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what they didn't yet know. He finally leaned back and smiled, as if this were a casual chat and not a murder investigation. "You've been looking for me for a long time," he said quietly. "You just didn't know it." One of the agents frowned. "What do you mean?" Keys tilted his head slightly, eyes sharp but empty. "You think this is about one girl? You have no idea how many." The agents looked at each other. One turned on the recorder. "Start from the beginning," he said. Keys took a deep breath, like a man about to tell a bedtime story. "I never had a type," he said. "It wasn't about them. It was about the planning." He explained that he had been killing for years, long before he moved to Alaska. He would choose a random state, fly there, rent a car, and drive hundreds of miles to a small town. There, he would dig up one of the kill kits he'd buried years earlier, plastic buckets filled with guns, ropes, zip ties, cash, and tools. Each one took hours to prepare, he said proudly. "I buried them where no one would ever find them." He'd then look for a house far from neighbors, one with no security cameras or barking dogs. He'd wait for the lights to go out, then quietly enter. He didn't care who lived there. It could be a couple, a single man, an old woman, it didn't matter. What mattered was control. The agents tried to stay calm, but their stomachs churned as Keys described what he did next, how he tied his victims, questioned them, and killed them without hesitation. He never revealed names at first, just the couple in Vermont or the woman near Seattle. Each new detail sent chills down their spines. When the agents asked why he did it, his answer was simple: "Because I could. Because I was better at it than anyone else." Over the next few days, he began confessing to crimes all across the United States. He talked about driving from Alaska to Texas just to withdraw ransom money. About flying to Vermont to murder a couple he'd never met. About burying murder kits in New York and Washington long before using them. He even bragged about how he studied other killers' mistakes to make sure he'd never be caught. "Bundy was sloppy," he said. "BTK got lazy. I never made the same mistakes." The more he spoke, the clearer it became that he wasn't exaggerating. The FBI began verifying his claims. Every place he mentioned matched a cold case, a disappearance that never made sense, a murder with no suspect. Keys refused to name all his victims. He liked the mystery, the power of knowing something no one else did. "Some of them, you'll never find," he said one evening. "They're in places you'd never think to look." He laughed softly, like it was a game only he could win. Still, investigators pushed for more. They brought in photos, maps, case files, hoping something might trigger him to talk. When they showed him pictures of missing people, he stared at them quietly. Sometimes, he'd smirk. Sometimes, he'd shake his head. Once, he looked at a photo of a young woman and simply said, "She put up a fight." Outside the interrogation room, agents worked around the clock, tracking his movements through rental car records and credit card receipts. They found evidence of him in at least 11 states, but Keyes hinted there were more. "I traveled a lot," he said. "It was easy. No one pays attention to a quiet guy who minds his own business." What made it worse was how ordinary his life looked from the outside. He ran a construction business, attended church, and raised his daughter. His neighbors liked him. His girlfriend thought he was kind and hardworking. No one suspected the darkness behind his calm smile. The more the FBI learned, the more horrifying it became. Keyes told them he didn't act on impulse. Every killing was planned months or even years in advance. He'd bury a kid, return home, and wait until the urge came back. Then he'd travel to wherever that kid was buried and find a random victim nearby. It was methodical. Cold. Almost military. One of the agents finally asked him, "Why now? Why tell us all this?" Keyes looked at him for a long time before answering. "Because I'm bored," he said simply. "It's over now. Might as well make it interesting." He refused to say how many victims there were. But he hinted at more, always leaving them guessing. One day he said, "I've told you enough for now." Then he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "If I decide to talk again, I'll let you know." That night, agents reviewed every word he had said, every map he had pointed to. They knew he was toying with them. He wanted control, even from behind bars. But they couldn't afford to stop. There were families out there still waiting for answers. Days later, while the FBI was planning to move him to another facility, Keyes asked for a cup of coffee and a pencil. The guard gave them to him, unaware of what was coming. Hours later, when the officer returned, Keyes was slumped over the desk, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. He had cut his wrists and throat using a razor blade he had somehow hidden in his cell that he left behind, an 11-page note written in tiny letters. Not a confession, but a chilling poem about death and darkness. It gave no clues about his victims. Just the final thoughts of a man who wanted the last word, but the mystery didn't end there. After his death, investigators discovered more of his buried kits across the country, proof that he had been planning new murders right up until the day he was caught. Even now, the FBI believes there are victims whose names may never be known. Each case connected by one thing: a man who planned every murder as if it were a project, leaving no trace except for the fear that he might have killed again. If they hadn't stopped him when they did, and just when the world thought the story was over, one final piece of evidence surfaced: a hidden note found behind the wall of his shed in Alaska, sealed in plastic. What it said would change everything they thought they knew about Israel Keyes.